everybody doing today? You doing good? Hey, listen, guys. Before first service, I just got the notification that Team USA beat the Netherlands. What a perfect patriotic moment for us all together on 4th of July weekend. I said that first service, and then some other people came up to me like, listen, we're going to watch the game. I'm like, people tape soccer? Like, that's a thing? But anyway, sorry. My wife's a soccer player, so that's that. Hey, I'm so glad you guys are here today. My name is Rob. I'm the young adults pastor here at Cross Point. And yeah, got a little bit of young adults in the room today. Hey, I want to let you know, if you are a young adult, we have our young adult first Sunday gathering tonight at 6:30 p.m. right here in the Hope Center. And man, we want to encourage you to come. If you're 18 to 30-something, single or married in grad school or in school or the workforce, we want to invite you to come. It's going to be a lot of fun tonight. But today, I want to ask you a question. Have you guys ever had to fill out an application for anything? Yeah, if you're in here, there's probably, you've pretty much have to, if you are alive today, you have to have at least applied for something and filled out an application for something. Like if you want to, apply for a driver's license, I talked to a guy in the back who's like just getting his permit. If you want to buy a house, if you want to get married, if you want to get into a school, there's always a form you have to fill out. You know this? There's always a form. And you write your name down, and then right next to your name, there are a bunch of boxes. And it's in these boxes where we kind of like select and we kind of check and we kind of label ourselves. And it's based on how we fill out these boxes that these organizations will look at us. And they'll decide if they want to accept us. They'll decide if they want to approve you. They'll decide if you want to get what you want to get. And some of these boxes are pretty straightforward, pretty normal, pretty standard. Like, hey, what's your age? What's your height? What's your gender? But then some of the boxes, they get pretty personal. Have you guys ever filled out like a personal box? Like, it's like, name, age, gender. How much money you make? They're like, also, prove it. Let's see the last couple pay stubs. Want to see this thing. They're like, listen, have you ever been arrested? Like, if so, when and why? They're like, hey, what were the last few employers that you had? Why'd you leave that job? Also, what's their phone numbers? I want to text them. Also, what's your greatest weakness? And you can't put singing in the shower, guys. That's not really a weakness. Like, these are the kind of things that you wouldn't give out, like, on a first date with someone. You just kind of, but these organizations, they're like, we're just going to skip to the good stuff. Let us know everything about you, and we will let you know. It's a really interesting thing. And, I remember a season for me where I filled out a lot of applications. I was a young college student, and just like every other young college student, I just needed more money. And so my dad, he encouraged me very nicely and gingerly and hastily. He's like, you need to get another job. And so we, he taught me all like how to do, go and get another job, apply for some things. He's like, okay, you got to dress up. You got to look the part. You got to go in and you need to fill out an application. And then after you fill out the application, you say, I would like to speak to the manager, please. And you turn in the application to the manager. And then you say, listen, sir or ma'am, I'm very excited to be hearing back from you. I'm looking forward to working for your organization. And so, I'm like, okay, here we go. And so, but for some reason, my dad really loved the company Sam's, like Sam's Club. And he's just like, you need to work at Sam's. It's like awesome. It's great. I don't know why he so pushed me to work at Sam's. We didn't have a Costco. I grew up in Missouri. So we didn't have a Costco in Missouri. And so I went to Sam's. And I don't know if you've ever been dressed up going to Sam's. You just feel out of place. If you've been dressed up at I need a cutoff shirt or something. Like I need something just to fit in a little bit more. And I remember I went up and I'm like, okay, here we go. Got the pep talk from Dad. And so I walk up and I'm like, I'd like to, customer service, I'm like, I'd like to fill out an application, please. And this woman behind the desk, she's like, okay, go to that computer. It's all online now. And I'm like, oh, okay, technology, cool. So I went up and I filled out the application. And then I realized like I couldn't turn in an application because it was all online. And so I went back and I'm like, listen, I filled out my application, but I'd love to speak to a manager. And the woman says, the managers don't speak to potential employees. And I said, no, you don't understand. Like, I'm the potential employee. Like, we probably want to talk to each other. Just like, we're going to be working together. It's going to be fun to, like, get to know each other and stuff. And so there's like, no. And so, like, after some back and forth, because I'm not going to go back home to my dad and tell him I didn't get to talk to the managers. Like, one of the main things he told me to do. And so After a while, she said, listen, you can come back and you can apply as many times as you want on this computer, and you can apply for as many jobs as you want. And I said, okay, I'll do that. So I came back another day, and I went to the computer, and I applied, and I said, hey, I would like to speak to the manager. And she goes, the manager doesn't speak to potential employees. I say, I will come back another time. And so I did this a couple times until I started to believe that managers really did not speak to potential employees. And I applied so many times to the Sam's Club in Springfield, Missouri. I went back several times. And then after a few weeks, I'm just like, okay, I'm just not going to go back again. But then I remembered, I'm like, wait, I haven't even heard back from the online applications that I submitted. I didn't just apply for one job. I applied for every position in Sam's that you could possibly have. And I'm like, I did not hear back from one thing. And I started to get a little nervous. I'm like, whoa, man. And I started to think about the application that I filled out. And I started to think about the check boxes that I filled out right next to my name. And you know what you do when you fill out an application? You kind of look at it, and it's kind of a snapshot of who you are. You know that? The things that you fill out on the form, you kind of get a snapshot of your identity, of who you think you are. And I remember thinking, I'm like, man, did I fill out my application the wrong way? Did I not do it, did I not do it good enough? I'm like, wait a second, I just filled out who I was and stuff. And then I began to think of this thing. I'm like, man, maybe they looked at who I was and they said, we probably don't need this one. We'll be fine. Has it ever happened to you? Have you ever felt, the weight of the labels and the check boxes that you have on yourself? And have you ever thought, man, what's so wrong with me that I've been labeled less than? Most of us, we begin to attach our identity to the labels that we wear. We look to what we put on a form, and we look at that and we say, that's who I am. These check boxes make up the entire sum of who I am as a person. And, you start, not only the stuff you put on a form, but you start adding other things too. You look and say, okay, I'm single. I'm single. This is the label that I put on myself. I'm a single person. It filters everything through who I am. Everyone looks at me and they think I'm a single person or whatever. Or maybe you're like, okay, my income is, man, I'm killing it. I'm the rich dude in the room, okay? I take care of people around here. That's what I do. That's how I find what I need to be doing. I need to filter it out through that. Or maybe you're the opposite. You're I'm the financial crazy mess guy. I'm trying to hide this one right here. I'm not letting anyone see it, but it drives everything that I do. Or maybe you're like, man, my age, I'm just too old to do anything anymore. I can't make a difference for anything because I'm just an old person. Or maybe you're like, oh, I'm just the creative one, right? I'm not the creative one. Or maybe you're like, oh, I was the high school quarterback guy. I'm the athletic dude. Or maybe you're like, well, I'm just kind of the band geek. I don't know if I can do that. Maybe you're like, you wear the badge of the label of, I went to that highly rated university. Or maybe you wear the label of, I got waitlisted at a junior college. Maybe you're in here and you wear the label of attractive. And if that's you, good for you. But maybe you're in here and you wear the label of, I've got a good personality, kind of. And what we don't realize is that the labels that we wear end up informing our identity. And our identity are the things that will either hold us down or free us up. And so often, we submit to our labels that we put on ourselves. We submit to a label almost as if it holds us hostage. And we think, you know what, I'm never going to try out for that team because I'm the unathletic person. Or you know what, I'm not going to go for that promotion because I'm just kind of a pencil pusher. That's kind of who people told me I am. Or maybe you keep everybody at an arm's distance from yourself because you're like, you know what, I'm damaged goods. I've messed up too many times in my life and relationships that I'm just not going to let anyone in. Or maybe you're like, man, I'm never going to join a growth group or get involved at church because I'm just not a spiritual person. That's just not who I am. And the problem with submitting to labels you put on yourself or that other people have put on you is that God has a plan for you. God actually has a specific purpose for you in mind. He's put gifts and abilities inside of you. He wants you to do amazing things for his kingdom and for his glory and for your good. And he knows that if you submit to these labels that we assign to ourselves, that you will never step out in faith. He knows that if you always look to these as like, okay, I'm going to filter all my whole life through these labels and I can't do anything outside of that, you will never reach your potential as a Christ follower. Because God knows the only way for you to discover and work through the gifts and abilities and find purpose and freedom and peace and acceptance in the eyes of God is when you step out in faith and you follow God. But many of us in this room today, we've never done it. Because when we think about who we are, we think about these. You know, there's a man in history who is extensively written about in the Bible who had a lot of labels on him. And he had these labels on him that actually held him back for years. Years and years and years. And this man at 80 years old, he decided, you know what? I'm not going to live life with these labels on me from now. I'm going to drop these labels and I'm going to listen to what God says about me. And his life was forever changed. And history as we know it was forever changed. I want to set the scene for you. Nearly 2 million Israelites have just escaped slavery in Egypt. Pharaoh finally relented and set them free after 10 devastating plagues to his country. But after they leave, you know, the Pharaoh, as he sees that last slave, Egyptian, or last Hebrew slave walk out the door, he remembers, oh my gosh, my entire economy is walking out the door. My entire workforce is walking out the door. And he instantly forgets about the grief of these 10 plagues that have just happened to him and his country. And his body just fills with anger. And he says, I'm going to go get these people. And so he gets all of the might in the army of Egypt and all his charioteers and army. And he starts going towards these people, these Hebrew people who have just been freed. And word gets back to the Hebrews as they come up against the Red Sea, saying, hey, listen, Pharaoh's coming with the entire might of Egypt, and they're going to kill us. And so the Israelites are trapped. They can't go backwards because that's where the army is. They can't go anywhere else because it just wouldn't work. They can't go in front of them because that's where the Red Sea is. And then in this passage in Exodus, we have one of the most famous passages of scripture in all the Bible. Even if you haven't been in church, like growing up, you've probably heard about this passage. You know, you've probably seen that Charlton Heston movie or The Prince of Egypt or whatever. You've kind of heard about this, and I just want us to lean into this passage real quick. It says this in Exodus 14, verse 21. It says, then Moses raised his hand over the sea, and the Lord opened up a path through the water with a strong east wind. The wind blew all night, turning the seabed into dry land. And the people of Israel walked through the middle of the sea on dry ground with walls of water on each side. Then the Egyptians, all of Pharaoh's horses, chariots, and charioteers, chased them into the middle of the sea. Just before dawn, the Lord looked down to the Egyptian army from the pillar of fire and cloud and threw their forces into total confusion. He twisted their chariot wheels, making their chariots difficult to drive. Let's get out of here, away from these Israelites, the Egyptians shouted. The Lord is fighting for them against Egypt. And when all of the Israelites had reached the other side, the Lord said to Moses, raise your hand over the sea again. Then the waters will rush back and cover the Egyptians and their chariots and their charioteers. So the sun began to rise, and Moses raised his hand over the sea, and the water rushed back into its usual place. The Egyptians tried to escape, but the Lord swept them into the sea. Then the waters returned and covered all the chariots and charioteers, the entire army of Pharaoh. All of the Egyptians who had chased the Israelites into the sea, not a single one survived. If I were to say the name Moses to you, this is the story that we think of. This is like the famous man of the Bible who we look back on with such reverence, with such like awe of how God just did some incredible things through Moses. We think of him like literally putting his hand out in the waters parting. And he freed the people of Israel from hundreds and hundreds of years in slavery in Egypt. And Moses got to experience just such incredible, mighty acts of God and such incredible miracles of God through his lifetime. But what if I told you that there was even a greater miracle than all the ones that happened there? What if I told you the fact that Moses was even the person doing this was one of the biggest miracles in this whole story? Because here's the real story of Moses. Moses was a guy who let labels define who he was for the majority of his life. His earliest memories growing up were probably walking through the palace in Egypt. He grew up in luxury. Although adopted, he would walk around, and Pharaoh was his adopted grandfather. But at some point in his life, we don't know if it was early or it was later on, it was revealed to him that he wasn't an Egyptian, he was actually a Hebrew person. He was actually one of the people who were enslaved. And all of a sudden, Moses has this new label that's been put on him. He's a slave child. And this idea of like, who am I? Like, am I second class? Like, what am I doing here? It became all-consuming in his thoughts. And one day he goes out to see the people, and when he sees these people, he doesn't just see slaves anymore. He starts to see his countrymen. He starts to see his people. And he sees one day this Egyptian slave master going and just beating the tar out of this one Hebrew person. And he goes there, and Moses kind of has this like high sense of justice about him. He cares so much about like right and wanting to make sure that people are treated fairly. And so he goes in there and he starts to have words with this guy, and these words turn into blows, and then the unthinkable happened. And Moses had another label put on him. Murderer. Moses kills this man. And despite his best efforts to conceal the body, word gets out. And Pharaoh, a man who was a part of his family, now wants to kill him for retribution. And so what does Moses do? He flees. He runs into the desert, and he adds a new label to his chest. Fugitive. From the lap of luxury to obscurity in the desert, Moses takes the role of a shepherd. And a shepherd isn't something, Moses is 40 years old at this point. A shepherd isn't something that like a grown man does. A shepherd back then was something that you would give to little boys to do. You're just sitting around all day, kind of watching around for the sheep and kind of protecting them. That's something that little boys do. And so another label was put on this 40-year-old Moses' chest where he says, I'm a failure. What am I doing with my life? And after 40 years, Moses believes that these new labels, they eclipse any other label that God may have ever put inside of him. But after 40 years of being a murderer, fugitive, slave child, this happens. When Moses is an old man, he's 80 years old, and it says this in Exodus chapter 3, verse 1. It says, one day Moses was tending the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of the Midian. He led the flock far into the wilderness and came to the Sinai, the mountain of God. There an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire from the middle of a bush. Moses stared in amazement. Though the bush was engulfed in flames, it didn't burn up. This is amazing, Moses said to himself. Why isn't that bush burning up? I must go see this. I must check this out. When the Lord saw Moses coming to take a closer look, God called out to him in the middle of the bush. He said, Moses, Moses. Here I am, Moses replied. In this moment, God audibly and visibly appears to him, and he begins to unfold this incredible rescue plan of the children of Israel. And he says, Moses, I want you to lead this effort. And God decides to put another label on Moses. Chosen for a purpose. He said, listen, Moses, you are the one who is going to see some incredible things. I'm going to work through you, and amazing things are going to happen. And this justice, this high justice that you have, that you want to see your people saved, I'm going to use you to do it. But get this. Moses' response to this label that God wants to put on him, he's like, hey, God, I forgot I know you probably heard about those other things, but I didn't tell you about another label that I did have. I actually don't speak so good. Like, I'm a stutterer. And Moses decides to tell God, I forgot about this one too. I'm a stutterer. I can't speak well. And think about this, guys. Moses has just seen and talked with God through a burning bush. And the weight of his labels were so strong that not even the visible and audible voice of God would ease his fears. But here's the good news about God. And here's the good news for you today. God, he's patient with you. And he's not caught off guard when we say, God, when he comes to you and he says, I want you to step out in faith. I want you to do this. And so often, every single person in this room, we look at our labels and we say, God, I don't think I can do that because look at this. And God, he's so good. And he's so patient with us. He's not caught off guard when we bring our labels as excuses. You know, God actually began to work with Moses to untangle himself from years of this supposed identity. And it was only then where God was able to use Moses to free the people of Israel from slavery. And Moses watched God do some incredible things, what we just read about, parting the Red Sea. Like, Moses was the guy who God personally met with on top of mountains and would deliver his message to the people. Like, he was the one who God instructed him. He's like, I'm going to give you a new law for my people, set apart people. And it's through this law that they will be able to see that this people is different than any other people who's ever existed. Like, Moses was the guy who God used to deliver it to them. And for generations, people talked about how God used Moses. And for generations, they would look back at Moses and say, look at the faith of Moses. Look how he stepped out in faith. Look how he was identified, not by what he thought he was, but by who God chose him to be. But if we're honest with ourselves, we have to look back and realize that Moses had the same struggles of identity that all of us have today. And here's what's important to understand. Moses, he wasn't picked by God because of his labels. He was picked by God in spite of his labels. In 2 Corinthians chapter 5 and verse 16, it says this, so we have stopped evaluating others from a human point of view. At one time, we thought of Christ as merely from a human point of view. How differently we now know him. This means that anyone who belongs to Christ is a new person. The old life, the life with all the labels, the life with all the stuff that he's been carrying you down and weighing you down, he's saying when you begin a relationship with Jesus, that's gone. You're a new creation. And let me put it a different way. God, Jesus, has relabeled you. And the label that now comes in front of every other label is belongs to Christ. This label, it supersedes any other label that's out there from you. Whether you've given it to yourself or other people have given to you, it redefines our identity. And the weight and size of this label is so great that no other label can compare. But a lot of us, we live life with a bunch of different labels, and you may even be here and you're a Christian and you think that, okay, I belong to Christ, but that's just a list that's just with all my other labels that I have here. But in your heart of hearts, you know that there are certain labels that outweigh other labels. There's certain things that are weighty and powerful. You just don't believe that this one is powerful enough. You know, we do this activity here at Crosspoint called Radical Mentoring. And I got to be a part of Radical Mentoring group last year. And one of the first assignments that you get to do is you have to write your 3-sentence obituary. Sounds morbid, but it's like an incredible exercise. And we think about, like, what are the 3 sentences that are going to define you? What are the three things, the 3 sentences, what are the words that are going to make up to kind of like sum up your life and sum up who you are and your identity and all these different things? And it was an incredible incredible activity to go through, and it got me thinking about this. And you know, I want to. You guys mind if we do a little activity together? Is that cool? You know, I'm gonna read. I wrote some obituaries for people who haven't died yet, but maybe I want you to see if you can kind of catch who they are. Okay? So I'm gonna read the obituary, and we're gonna see what happens. So this first guy, this is the obituary that could be written about him. After a few wild years as a young man, including a DUI, he finally settled down, married a librarian, and had twin daughters. He also made a small fortune in oil. Now, some of these details may be included in this man's obituary, but they're going to be the smaller ones. They're going to be the ones that we don't, like, it kind of pales in comparison. There's going to one detail that kind of outweighs and supersedes the rest of this. And it's this: George W. Bush, 43rd President of the United States. Let's do another one. All-star wide receiver in high school, donated several $1 million to charities, including opening up a charter school in his hometown. You know, this is a great thing, you know, but this is not going to be the first line of his obituary. It's going to be like this: LeBron James, a champion for a record 3 different franchises. I'm saying the third one in faith. We're hoping the Lakers experiment works out. A guy can dream, right? Right. That's going to be the thing we remember about LeBron James. What about this one? Heisman Trophy winning running back at USC. All-pro NFL player, successful pitchman, and actor. Unfortunately, these aren't going to be the things that we first think of when we think of O.J. Simpson. Because listen, the labels that we wear, some of them are so incredible and so heavy that they outpower and eclipse every other label that we have. And belongs to Christ, this label of, hey, I'm a new creation, God has changed me from the inside out. This is the weightiest, this is the most powerful label that you could ever put on yourself. And this is the label that outplays every other label in your life. You may think, I'm not good enough, or I'm dumb, or I'm whatever. It doesn't matter, because the most important thing about you is that you belong to Christ. The labels that we wear, they define our identities. And our identities, they're going to be the thing that either locks us down or that frees us up. Jesus today, he wants to free you up. He wants so much for you. But he knows if you keep looking to your labels that the world gives you and that you give yourself, or that maybe your family has given you, or your friends given you, you're never going to step out and do what God wants you to do. God knows that when you just rest in the label that he has given you as a child of God belonging to Christ, that will give you the power and the ability to step out and do what you never thought possible. So when you came in today, you should have received a sticky note. And here's what I want you to do with it. I want you to write down a label that is locking you down. Everyone, I want you guys to find it. Write down one thing that is a limiting label for you in your life. And I want you, after you write it down, I want you to pray and say, God, I will not be defined by this label anymore. I'm not going to walk around with this being the most important thing about me. I'm going to remove that label, and I'm going to replace it with a label that says belongs to Christ. And after you write that label down, and after you pray, I want you to crumple it up and just put it on the ground. Because when you begin a relationship with Jesus, that's the main thing that defines you. You stop letting the check boxes beside your names be the snapshot of your life. You stop letting past mistakes or past hurts to be the thing that define you. When you begin a relationship with Jesus, it's like Moses. You could have spent 80 years letting these other things define you, but you say, you know what, today's the day that I'm not going to let anything else define me except Jesus.